and as I think about collecting them together into like an album, I see how they relate and like how I went from one to the next and like what that flow means, and they start to take on, meaning after the fact.
Hello and welcome to Where the Living Room Used to Be, a podcast about Rhode Island's music scene.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. This is my first time ever doing an Instagram live, believe it or not. So okay. I have no idea how to like work the thing.
No problem at all. Yeah, I've only done a couple. And they can be a little bit tricky. The unable to connect, whatever kept on coming up, was the first time I've ever seen that. But I'm glad we're here now. I'm glad we're able to connect for this interview. So
Absolutely.
I remember. I mean, you reached out to me a couple of years ago. Thanks for sticking around and keeping me in your, in your memory of person to talk to. But I'm glad we have this opportunity because you're playing a pretty big show this coming Saturday, November 12th. Stack lineup with you, with A Line in Time, and also with Secret Gardens from New York. And Circus Trees from, I forgot which town, but somewhere in Massachusetts.
Boston. Yeah, they're Circus. Boston area, yeah.
Boston area, cool. And then, one of my, personal favorites, Strip Mall, is also on the show. So it's an incredible night of music. But I'd love to just talk to you a little bit about your career. And, I mean, you make some really, really interesting music. So I'd love to just kind of talk to you about that and even just talk a little bit about, like, what got you into music? How long have you been creating?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your first point, my wife and I moved here like 4 years ago now for like a solid chunk of time before the pandemic. So when I put out my most recent album, I was looking for, local places, local music sites, people doing fun things in the music scene locally. And I came across your compilations and the stuff like this, interviews that you've been doing, and so that was why I reached out. So I'm psyched that we finally get to connect. But so I mean, I've been playing music definitely since I was a kid. I was, as I grew up, parents were like getting me and my sisters to try different instruments, and I settled on guitar. That was I remember. At one point, we had a whole discussion. My parents were like, you have to play piano or guitar because those are the two instruments you can play by yourself.
Okay.
I had tried like trombone or whatever, but you can't exactly like play a solo song on trombone the same way.
Yeah.
So I had been doing piano, and then I said, you know what, I want to switch to guitar because that seems way cooler, to my whatever 11-year-old self at that time. And then since then I've played in bands like in high school and college. Towards the end of high school, I started writing just random stuff that didn't seem to fit with the band I was in at the time. Felt instrumental. I was getting into like film scores and post-rock artists like Sigur Rós and Explosions in the Sky, and being really influenced by that stuff. And so it started with just like one song that was kind of like a fun experiment. And then I was like, it'd be cool to keep writing more songs like that. And then it took me a while, but I wrote the first album's worth and recorded it, and then did the same thing again, very slowly writing another album over the span of like 7 or 8 years. And that's how I got here.
Yeah. But with that, this is essentially a solo project, correct? You have a drummer that will play on albums and stuff like that. But, even taking that inspiration from those other bands, at least to my knowledge, they're bands, they have people, and I mean, what does it take for you to create these like elaborate soundscapes by yourself? You know, is it freeing, or is it like even more challenging because you don't really have people to kind of move this stuff along with, or what's that experience like for you?
Yeah, it's probably a lot slower, first of all, because I'm just,
Yeah.
yeah, you agonize over things in a way probably that you can't when you have other bandmates helping you write. But definitely for me, a big influence I remember in high school and then into college was Casey Crescenzo he was in the receiving end of Sirens. And
Yep.
he sort of famously had a side project, The Deer Hunter, that was
Oh yeah.
similar approach. It was just him like writing music, recording music on his own, and I loved Treos. I loved The Deer Hunter, and it was like such an inspiring thing to see this guy who was in a band that I loved, but like had this whole other outlet for the
Hmm.
music that felt like really his personality, coming through in this separate project.
Yeah.
And so that was a real like inspiration, like, oh, this is a cool thing. Maybe I can just like write my own music and see how it goes. And it was all just kind of like learning through the process too of like how to demo things on my own and like get them
Hmm.
to a reasonable place. And um yeah, using drum machines and like figuring out how to write. I'm not a drummer, so how to like write drum parts that don't suck and that real drummers could actually play.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you like writing the parts, or are you letting the drummers
yes,
play them, like kind of come up with their own pieces? Or are you actually like fully fleshing that out and just having someone else like execute it in the studio, basically?
yeah, pretty much the latter so far. I mean, I
Okay.
think like I've come to appreciate just the unique perspective that a drummer brings, like a real drummer
Uh-huh.
brings, someone who actually knows how to play the instrument. I think the first two albums definitely I wrote like down to the note, kind of each part.
Oh, okay.
um, on a drum machine, and it sounds terrible when you're writing. It sounds like just like very fake, and
A machine. Yeah,
doesn't really
yeah.
come to life. And then when you actually get into the studio and you're recording it, drummers, real drummers, just can like run with it a little bit and then
Yeah,
change the fills, like make it feel more natural, and even just
exactly.
obviously
Yeah.
putting it on a real drum set will just make it feel so much more real. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I definitely I wrote those parts for the first two albums, and they then had the first album. One of my good friends, Jesse Hangen, recorded parts, and then the second time around, I was in Nashville, and so we got a guy, Tyler Mahurin, who was a connection of the producers that I work with, Brian Russell, who's been in a ton of bands over time. Right now, he's the drummer for a big country artist, actually.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, he just learned the parts, showed up 2 days of like really intensive recording. And
Yeah,
that was,
yeah.
but yeah, I feel like for
Cool.
future recordings, I've thought about how it'd be fun to have, leave a little more room for the drummer, or whoever records the parts to be a little bit more involved with like helping shape it,
Oh, I
shape,
gotcha. Yeah.
shape the parts, just because they like, it's their instrument. They know it much better than I do.
Hmm.
I've learned a lot writing the parts, but I think it'd be fun to collaborate more too. So
Yeah. But with that, like, how are your songs created? Like, are you writing riffs and then piecing them together, or are you like coming up with more of a plan, and
yeah,
then we'll kind of go from there. But I have another question kind of following up with that, because I know you have like a lot of elements of storytelling that you want to have with this. But I just was kind of
yeah, for sure.
curious if you have like a linear thing that you're just building on this song to get to that point, or is it just like these are some cool riffs that comes together in a nice 3 minute package, or
Yeah,
whatever else it is,
yeah, totally. Yeah, it usually starts as like a riff or an idea, right? Like you're just
Yeah.
noodling around on a guitar, or whistling or messing around with a drum machine or whatever, and there's
Hmm.
something that sticks out and it's like, oh, cool, I should explore that further.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then usually pretty quickly from there, I'll start to get a sense, to your point, of like, I'm really big on like figuring out the arc of the song. Like, where is it
Hmm.
starting? Where is it going to end up? And therefore, like, what needs to happen to get there? So I think
Hmm.
like that, to your point, a lot of the songs have that kind of like real structure to them, which is influenced by some of like we talked about those other bands, or like certainly like, yeah, film scores and that kind of musical storytelling. Like I grew up, parents were really big on musicals. I grew up listening to a lot of musicals, and I feel like that concept of like, yeah, recurring themes and stuff is very much a part of it. But yeah, it's not a fast process. It's kind of like there's an idea section, and I'll say, okay, like where does this section feel like it fits in the song? Does this feel like it's the climax of the song? Does it feel like it's an intro? Does it feel like something in the middle? Is it like a transition between, two sections? So usually it's kind of like it grows out from that part. Like I'll figure out, okay, I have this part and it feels like it should go here after that. Or I have this part and it feels like this should lead into that. And then so it's like kind of growing out from that initial idea until I get to a start and end point. And then sometimes I'll have like, I'll get inspired and say like, this feels like where it should end up. And so I'm going to like find a way to get there. I'll come up with another.
Like how can you get like
exactly. I'll be like
your fretboard in a certain way so that it makes sense.
Yeah, maybe not that precise, but more like end section, and it's going to sound really big and like have these big chords and like whatever, and I'll be starting from a place that's much smaller. I'll be like, okay, how can it build to that? Like, or do I want to build to that? Maybe it should just be like a sudden jump, right? Maybe it should just be a really big impact from the quiet to that sort of thing. So, definitely not a science at all, and not like a set process. Changes every time for sure.
Okay, cool. But yeah, with regard to what I previously mentioned, I do remember reading that the songs that you could write are kind of like loosely biographical, and that you want to have a story to them. So I'm interested to kind of hear a little bit more about that and like how you translate that, as an instrumental artist, of like what it takes to do that. Where like obviously with lyrics you can just state what you're feeling or whatever else, but trying to create that mood and all of that. What's going on in your head to have that stuff translate?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's obviously not very literal. It can't be. Nor would I want it to be, because I think it's really fun for people to be able to listen and interpret in their own ways. I think I have general sense, certainly. I think a project, to your point, that like I'm writing on my own. I'm writing it very slowly, sort of in the background of life, as I go through different phases, living in different places, job stuff, relationship stuff, having a kid. I now have a kid. And all that stuff, I think, gets channeled into it in some, not necessarily very literal or direct way. But I think in terms of, I do think about my music as sort of reflective of my personality. I think it may be more the way to put it is like this in my music. I feel like I try to write music that captures what I love about a lot of the artists that I love. And so it's sort of an encapsulation of that. And so it ends up being very biographical in the sense that like it reflects like how I prefer like emotion to be expressed through music, So how I feel at different points in my life when I write each song, because I tend to write them one at a time. So they end up being like sort of snapshots of like, this is where my head was at that moment in time.
Oh, okay.
And because of that, they inevitably to me have those associations like, this reminds me of this point in my life. And so, and as I think about collecting them together into like an album, I see how they relate and like how I went from one to the next and like what that flow means. And they start to take on, meaning after the fact too, for me as like a listener of my own music. And that's how I get to the process of kind of like naming them too. A lot of times I usually don't name them until they're done, because that's when I start to get clarity around like what they signify to me, and most of the names are references to things that are important to me, like either quotes from books that I've read or films or conversations I've had with friends and family. Like pretty much none of the names actually are like just something I came up with out of my head. They're almost all references to specific things that I've connected with.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't like, I don't share out all that stuff because I don't want to like give people a bunch of baggage. I want to let them listen to it their own way, but it helps, me represent what the feeling I'm going for is.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting to hear that. Yeah, you write these, one at a time, in a sense that you like are just working on this composition, and once that's done, then you can kind of move on. That's cool to hear.
Yeah, occasionally it'll be at most maybe like two, or like I'll have an idea for a third, but I find it hard to like jump back and forth. I'm not good at that. I don't know. I'm always amazed at really prolific songwriters that can, bang out an album in an album's worth of songs in a month or whatever. I'm just like, my God, maybe I'm not good enough, or I'm too like particular about it or something. I just need to loosen up. It sounds impossible.
Well, I mean, you're doing this on your own, and writing these like really intense from listening to all of your stuff, and I do remember reading as well, like you just really also love like the production side of it and having all of those things like be really well put together, so I could just see that if you're doing all of that stuff, it's just like out of necessity that it's going to take a little bit more time than here's a 3-chord folk song that you can that's purposely meant to like sing and write on on a porch or whatever, so
right.
But yeah, I mean, I'd love to actually talk a little bit about your albums. Your first album, Me and My Arrow, came out in December of 2011, correct?
Somehow.
And what do you mean by that?
It's just so long ago. I can't believe.
Oh, okay.
I cannot believe it's 11 years. Like it's so nuts.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's a powerful record. One thing that I'd kind of picked up on is that you did some of the tracking with Mike Portman at Strangeways, correct?
Yep.
I did some recording with at Strangeways as well. I've done a few albums there.
Oh, nice, cool.
With Daryl Rabidou, who was in Cancer Conspiracy and Mike's partner. But yeah, it's a great space. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to talk to you about that record, what the recording process was like for you, what it was like working, at Strangeways, or anything like that you want to shout out about that album.
Yeah, for sure. So I did most of the recording in Beltsville, Maryland, which was at the time where the producer that I worked with, Brian Russell, was living. He had taken over the studio from Matt Squire. I don't know if you're familiar, another producer who had kind of like hit the big time and like was like co-writing with Katy Perry and like moved out to LA. Started doing way bigger stuff, and Brian took over his studio. And then when we were like starting to mix it, I wasn't thrilled. Like we both kind of like weren't totally thrilled with the way the bass sounded in particular. And so I had worked with Mike with my band right out of college, a band called Air to the Sun. When I went to college in Boston. And we had recorded our EP with Mike. Had a good experience, and he was close by. I was in the Boston area, so I just asked him. I was like, "Can I just come do a day of like just doing bass parts at your studio?" And it was great. Yeah, Mike's awesome, super chill guy. It's actually been a long time since I saw him or talked to him. But he also, in addition to Brian Russell, moved to Nashville. And he's Billie Eilish's drum tech, I think.
Exactly.
Speaking of blowing
he's still
up,
playing with Hot Rod Circuit. They started playing again, so he's doing all their
he was doing Hot Rod Circuit stuff, and then I would imagine Billie Eilish is a full-time gig for anybody.
Yeah, it's like arenas, so it's
totally.
But
but it was a good experience. Yeah, all we did was retrack all the bass parts and then send them to work into his mix. But it was cool. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I feel like a lot of I don't know, like producers and even artists from that whole scene have all moved to Nashville. And I know, like Nashville's where
Yeah.
where you go to if you want to do music stuff, but you don't want to live in LA pretty much.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
guess it's like, that's part of the appeal, but it was funny going to record the second album in Nashville. And just like hearing the names of everyone that's down there. It's like so many like emo bands and producers, certainly like from Mike Portman's scene. Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
Plus Brian and a ton of his connections are all down there now, which is really interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, with that record, like how, I mean, there was a gap that you were talking about the length of time it takes to make these albums. There's a gap between, your first and second, but how long did it take for you to create that first album? I mean, it seems like a really like flushed out idea when it came out, but like, so what was that like, creating this project, from the, the start that you were talking about until this album came out? So.
Yeah, the first song, like I mentioned, was just kind of like trying something out for the first time. I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I'll try to write a song on my own, see how it goes. And then it was probably like 4 or 5 years after that I had that album like all written, and I felt like, okay, I reached a point where I could see it all fitting together. I was like ready to record it, and felt like I wouldn't regret it or feel like I was missing something. It wasn't too soon. I remember the last song that I wrote for that was the 5th song on the album, Men Without Chests. And I remember after writing that, I felt like, okay, that felt like the last piece. That felt like now I have a cohesive group of songs, and that sort of clicked into place. So yeah, it was probably about 4 years of writing, and then another year from there with like recording all the production stuff. I just had everything demoed and then went and recorded with Brian.
Were you doing shows back then as well? I know it's, we'll get into the show this Saturday, but you said that there's been, like a 10-year gap of even just doing shows. So, like what were you doing, live, back then?
Yeah, we did, one tour. We did one show towards when the album came out. So that was exciting. Just like did one show actually at my college. I was at Boston College, and we did one sort of like show that I thought was just going to be one chance to like play all the music for some family and friends. And it was cool. It was a really cool moment. But then a year later, after I put the album out, we just like managed to string together a pretty short tour. I think it was like 8 or 9 dates or something on the East Coast, just because at that point I had been, I lived in Pennsylvania, and then I went to school in Boston, and it just sort of like worked out. I had enough connections. We, one of the guitarists had gone to school in Ithaca. So we like managed, and we had the bassist lived in northern New Jersey. And so we had enough, the drummers from Virginia. So we like did this string of dates that kind of went to like each of our hometowns or like college towns. And it was like enough to get some people to the shows. Yeah. So it was really fun. It was a really cool experience, just because the earlier conversation around like writing all this stuff on your own, it was just such a cool opportunity to be able to play it with friends and like hear how it sounds, when it's not just you like sitting in a room by yourself noodling around. so that was really
and the music
cool.
definitely lends itself to that too, I'd have to say. I mean, like, you're writing these like very big, songs, that
For sure, yeah.
it must be just great to hear live, so.
I always joke like that I'm not good enough at guitar to just write like one guitar part that sounds really cool. I have to write like three to approximate a cool guitar part. But yeah, so it's a totally different experience. Like the songs they're just made to be a lot of parts being played together,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I was just like so excited to have that chance to do that. And I didn't at the time think much, necessarily would happen beyond that. I didn't know. I figured I'd probably keep writing, but who knew, everyone
Mm-hmm.
post college moving to different places across the country. Like who knew when something would happen again. And then just, I had planned like many artists, I'm sure, to do a show, when the album came out in 2020. Obviously,
Yeah.
the world had other plans. So we didn't end up doing anything. We had talked about doing the video, maybe certainly doing at least a show, if not a sort of like mini tour of some sort. And then the pandemic hit. And so nothing happened around the album release, which was definitely a bummer. But in that context,
this is for On a Spiral, correct? The On a Spiral album that you put out. Yeah.
But obviously with everything going on in the world, it certainly wasn't like we were, I wasn't really focused on that in particular at that point in time. And my wife and I were trying to, get pregnant and have a kid. And so then a year later we had that and all, just music stuff kind of got set aside for a little bit, but it was cool. I got to do the album release, at a time when I could really focus on it. Like the pandemic kind of made all of us sit at home and, more than we would have otherwise. And then, once shows started happening again, I just sort of like started to feel it out with the rest of the band and say like, hey, would you guys be down for putting on a show? Do it in Providence in my new hometown, or not so new anymore, 4 years later. And like it's sort of like one step at a time. Like maybe more things will happen in the future, but right now it's just like a cool chance to do it. So then that started the process of like, getting the show organized, the first show in 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's really exciting. Again, to those that are just, joining on the live feed, A Line in Time, John is here from that. We'll be playing at Fete on this Saturday, November 12th with Secret Gardens and Circus Trees and Strip Mall, and it's going to be fantastic. So definitely go check that out. With this record, I mean, the latest record, On a Spiral, like even though you did put it out in the pandemic, it seems like it's doing pretty well. I mean, like just like reading some of the reviews and some other things like that, like people are really digging that, like digging that album. Like how does that feel to you, getting that response, especially because it came out in June of 2020. So, like it was still a pretty crazy time, as it is still now, but like it was but like having that where you're not able to kind of like fully back this up with shows and stuff like that, but having people of all areas reaching out and digging it. So what is that like to you, man?
I mean, obviously, like I said, it was hard to focus or feel too upset about things getting thrown off, but it was a really interesting time to try to do this whole process of like sending it out for reviews, or like, like people like you finding people doing podcasts or whatever, local music news, whatever. Just because, I mean, literally you didn't know where people were in life at that point, you didn't know who was sick, who had family sick, who needed to move across the country because they needed to be with family, like, or people obviously like moving around and changing their jobs and their lives to try to like accommodate all the crazy stuff that was happening. So it was a very weird time to try to promote music, and like just the weirdness of being like, listen to my album. Like, I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, but like also listen to my album.
Check it out.
But in a weird way, I mean, like it sounds cheesy, but I do think like, it was sort of a captive audience thing too. Like it felt like
Mm-hmm.
people were looking to music and, you know, art and film and books and relationships. It was obviously the start of like everyone being on video chats like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, it was a weird time definitely to go through that process. And I was doing it like 10 years or 8 years after the first album. So already I was trying to figure out like everything changed in terms of like, you know, in the music scene, what like platforms or channels existed, like influential reviewers or like influencers and all the different places you can like share music had changed.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I put out the first album, Spotify was like not
Yeah.
almost barely a thing at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually the first album I hadn't even put on Spotify when it came out, and then a couple years later I put it on Spotify. So the landscape was like it was just totally different, a totally different experience, and it was such a learning process of like not just okay, you write the music and you record the music, and that's important, but like how do you actually get the music out there? That was an
Mm-hmm.
entirely separate learning process that I went through. Um, but it was great. I mean, I think like the sort of scene that uh the post rock scene has become as this global thing. It's so niche, right? It's such a small genre in terms of like fandom. You know, if you think in
Mm-hmm.
terms of Spotify streams, like the biggest post rock bands are only like 150,000 streams or something like that, right? This isn't like
Mm-hmm.
a genre or 150,000 listeners. It's not a genre that like has a huge following, but it's really well connected online. Like there are a handful of, you know, YouTube channels, Instagram channels that kind of aggregate and promote music in this scene. So people know where to go when they, you
Uh-huh.
know, people that are into this music know where to find it. So that was like the biggest thing I think was just getting it, sharing it with those people that just have the right audience wherever they are. Cause it is so global. It's niche, but it's everywhere,
I
you know?
gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
So like the big channels are like in India and like Turkey and you know like that's where the big post rock channels are like run from the people that run
Oh
them and
wow.
they're small things, you know, it's just like a random person that loves the genre and is just puts an insane amount of time into like receiving inquiries from bands and posting videos to YouTube and like doing interviews and giveaways and reviews and like whatever. And it's really
Yeah.
amazing. They've like managed to foster this, you know, really, really cool community that's all very supportive and, you know, you can go like straight to the source of the people that are going to be most likely to be interested in this kind of music.
Mm-hmm.
Which is cool. And when I say this kind of music, it's still pretty broad. Like it's everything from like metal bands to like folk, you know, post rock is sort of a pretty vague definition of like music that tends to have slightly longer songs and be instrumental, right? But that
Yeah.
could be like
Yeah.
folk sounding or that could be like death metal sounding, depending
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
where you fall on the spectrum. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's really cool to hear that that's going on, that you're able to tap into that.
yeah.
You know, one question between the albums, like how, from your perspective, like how would you describe, um, if there is any difference between the two albums? Like how would you, you know, looking at them, in your life, like how, is there anything that kind of varies from them or certain, I know that obviously the pieces are kind of, you know, aligned with your time, but I don't know why I just said that. That was weird. I think I've been listening to your music too much, but like aligned with your timeline of,
Yeah, yeah, no,
they
I
tie
got
together.
it.
That's weird. But yeah, from your perspective, like how would you say that if there's a difference between the albums, like what kind of would that be, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, like we were talking about, the fact that they're so sort of synced up with the period in my life when I was writing them.
Mm-hmm.
That means that a lot of the differences, I think, are in line with what aligned, you might say, with what I was going through in those points in
Yeah.
my life. So I think, like, so that means the first album to me is a little bit maybe more optimistic and like
Mm-hmm.
youthful and sort of like bright-eyed and like this, you know, a little bit less, not as complicated. Maybe it feels a little bit more sort of like direct, straightforward. Whereas I feel like the second one just reflects, you know, another 8 to 10 years of like being a person and realizing, you know, more terrible things about the world and life, and like trying to, and about myself, you know, and trying to like come to terms with that stuff and come to terms with like my own limitations and flaws and challenges and whatever, and reflecting that through it as well. So to me, the second album is a lot more complicated, not literally in the sense of like it's more technically difficult to play or anything, although it is, I think, a little bit more musically complex. I think it also is just more emotionally dense and layered, and not as sort of like straightforward. Doesn't kind of just say like, here's the emotion you should be feeling right now. It's a little bit more inconsistent, a little like more evasive, and sort of you know, helping you see what it's trying to convey, because that's just how I feel now. I feel less certain about, you know, how I feel about certain things, you know, less certain about where my life's going, where the world's going, what I should or shouldn't be doing. I think like that uncertainty definitely is reflected in the music.
Yeah, I mean, just that you have one other release that you put out. It's a 2-song EP. It's like an acoustic version of, you know, a song from your first album, a song from your second album. You know, and you brought in some different instrumentation with this, you know, like mandolins and other things like that. But like, what inspired you to recreate those particular songs, or to work on a project that in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was sort of a pandemic type project. You know, just spending lots of time at home, isolated. I knew I wanted to keep the ball rolling with like writing music, and I had started on that, but it was a fun way to have an opportunity to like make something quickly and put it and share it, you know, without overthinking it. I was just like, I'll just have fun with it. I'll take a couple of songs. I did one song from each album, and yeah, I just thought like kind of take off the guidelines aside, like what the guidelines that I've used for the music so far, just say like, okay, aside from making it the same song pretty much, like what would I do with it if it doesn't need to be that traditional like electric guitar, bass, drums, instrumentation. So, yeah, I think part of what made it feel possible too was just that each of the songs to me is like, I hear the way it's recorded, but I kind of hear like the song stripped of all that as well. It's like the parts. I know that, you know, I feel like I hear the notes, the way that they go together is as important as all the production elements. So it was sort of a process of saying like, what's another way to express that same idea, right? And yeah, some of the things, again, definitely film score influenced, and that bringing in things like used a clarinet in one of the songs. My cousin, who I play a ton of music with, Russell Gutterson, he plays a lot of mandolin. So I just thought, why not? I sent him some ideas and just like, can you like mess around with this? He sent me a file back with like a whole bunch of parts, and we kind of like mishmashed it all together. Yeah, and then like I reached out to a drummer that I found online and just said like, hey, like here's a rough outline to the first thing we talked about giving a little more license to the drummer. I was like, here's a rough outline of a drum part. Like, can you help like finish it off, like make it a full song? So yeah, it was a cool experience. For me, it was really freeing. It was just like taking these ideas that I knew really well and just saying like, well, what if I like did them very differently, and a lot of the guitar parts changed, just stuff that sounds bad when you try to play it on an acoustic guitar just necessitated that. So there were a lot of like new parts and parts that were played really differently and things like that. But it was a cool learning experience, and definitely made me want to do that much more open-ended approach more with whatever comes next. I don't know yet if it'll be an album or an EP or whatever, but I loved the freedom of it. So like definitely I feel like for sure the next album or whatever I do next will have more acoustic guitars, probably more other instruments involved, be much more diverse in terms of like sort of the sonic palette, if you will. Mainly because of how great that experience was. And then the other thing that was very different about it is I did all the tracking myself, and then I did the mastering. So I still worked with Brian Russell. Brian Russell mixed it. But I recorded everything at home by myself, which was also a learning experience. He mixed it, and then he sent it back to me, and I mastered it. And that was cool too, because it just meant I had so much more time. I had full control. It's not as high quality as it would be if I went to a studio. It certainly can't match what Brian's capable of doing in like his studio with all of his gear. But being able to just, sit at home and try out parts and, mess around until I found something I liked was also, freeing. It kind of balanced out, the benefits. So.
No, I'd highly recommend anyone that's listening to check out anything that's John made with A Line in Time. I want to talk about your show, but is there anything else before that? Anything else that I missed that you wanted to touch upon before we kind of get into some of the details about the show? Or I guess I'll bring up. I just saw you tease that you just recorded a music video. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but it's pretty cool. Looks just from the stills, it looks pretty awesome. So, trying to think if tease out about that. Is it for something from On a Spiral, or is it for something else?
Yeah, it's for the song I Go To from On a Spiral, the last song on the album. I've never done a music video before, and to your point earlier about getting the band together in one place and how it's been hard. I figured, we have everyone in town right now. Everyone's learned all the songs and we're playing them anyways. So why not take advantage of it? So yeah, we did, the shows this coming weekend, and we did the video shoot yesterday, actually. Yeah, that was also a cool new experience, something I've never done before. We recorded with this producer, Joshua Hand, who's from Maine, has worked with a lot of Boston area bands as well. Some that I'm friends with. Yeah, it was a cool experience. It was we went to this old house that is sort of mid renovation, so it's seems kind of like it's getting renovated, but also kind of dirty and run down at the same time.
Nice.
And yeah, we just spent all day yesterday moving to different corners of that house, and yeah, it was fun. Again, definitely something I'd never done before. Getting used to like playing in front of a camera, it's a very weird experience. You're sort of fake playing because you're playing along to the track, but there are no amps, and no one else is, when you're playing alone, no one else is there, and you don't hear your part with, you don't hear guitar parts with distortion. You're just playing along to the recording. And it's weird to have a camera zooming in on your face and and you're trying
to look at it, whatever.
Don't look at it. And also you're like thinking about like, how do I look? Like what's, silly things like you're flailing around and your hair's in your eyes. And it's just, it's very easy to overthink the whole process, but it was fun. Joshua, the guy that we did it with, was great. Did a nice job making everyone feel comfortable. So yeah, it's probably still be a little while probably before it's finished, but yeah.
But yeah, we're watching for that. Hopefully, you do something cool, premiere that somewhere. But but yeah, let's talk about Saturday. Again, it's going to be a great show. But what can people expect from A Line in Time? What are you looking to bring to this show on Saturday night?
Yeah. Well, I'll start I can describe the band to start, because literally while we've been on this, I got a text saying I was obligated to name drop the band. So I'll do that now, because otherwise we were practicing tomorrow night and I don't want to get yelled at. So the band is, I play guitar for the live show. My cousin that I mentioned that plays mandolin is also playing guitar, Russ Gutterson. One of my good friends from college who I used to play in a band with, Cooper Heinrichs, is the third guitarist. And then the drummer is Jesse Hangen, who was also in that band from college. And then the bassist, Nick Fete, lives in the Warwick area, is a singer-songwriter who I've done a lot of playing with him. We do covers. We did a cover show last year, actually, or this year. I'm losing track of time. So it's all people that I'm friends with, or and one that I'm also related to, which makes it really fun. It's great. I feel like doing this sort of project, a solo project like this, would be very easy to just try to find musicians who are available and you can pay to do this, but having friends that are willing to put in the time is really, I feel really lucky to have that option, and it makes practicing and playing together a lot of fun. So yeah, it's definitely a process. You're going from people that like the music, maybe have listened to it, to trying to actually learn a whole it's 45 minutes to an hour of music. It's not like learning songs. They're 5 to 8 minute songs that have no repeating sections and no real song structure to them, no words, nothing to remember. So it's definitely it's pretty amazing. They've all put in a ton of time to be able to even just remember what's happening in the song, let alone actually play the parts right. So I'm super grateful to them for all the time they put in, and it's just going to be fun. I think it's easy when we're practicing like this to kind of get in our heads and be really worried about being precise. But I hope what people get out of the show is that we just kind of let loose and like, have fun and not focus so much on the precision aspect. I think like for me, shows are all about the energy and just like being in the room with people. So that's
Yeah.
what I feel is the vibe.
Yeah, it sounds intense. Like just as you're describing that, yeah, to come check that out. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I probably haven't mentioned here, but I played drums, and there's a lot of anchor points that I'm very happy that I can rely on. Of like, I got to wait for that vocal cue that comes in here, or
Yeah,
it's like it's a verse chorus, and I know what this thing is. But yeah, I mean, your songs are, they're just again like these incredible like soundscapes with no part that is there, or you just play these like short little segments once or whatever.
right.
Like,
Yeah, nothing to like
that stuff.
rely
So
on. It's
yeah,
Yeah, it's funny when we're moving through songs and we're like trying to describe, like, let's start from this point, like, let's like stop and then let's start from this point, and just like even trying to convey that makes you realize it's
yeah,
the like heavy part right after this part, or you try to like play your part, but like without the context, it's not, it's hard to
yeah,
communicate. You realize like
yeah,
how non-traditional it is when you try to describe it in that way. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I'm really excited for the show. It'll obviously be the first time we're playing all the Honest Spiral songs, and I'm excited
Hmm.
about the lineup too.
Hmm.
It's really cool that it worked out to have a bunch of local-ish artists. Secret Gardens is based out of New York, but I'm not sure what his connection is actually. He has some connection to Providence, so he's like been in and out of Providence at various points.
Cool.
And his stuff is super technical and like a little more proggier. It's really impressive, but like still very emotive and interesting.
Hmm.
And
That
then
sounds
Circus
cool.
Trees from Boston. Um, Also part of the kind of like the same post rock scene. Like, if you, again, those channels that I was mentioning earlier, that kind of part of the post rock community, Secret Garden, Circus Trees, me, and many other artists are kind of all like in the same circles online. It feels like I had seen their names
Oh,
pop
that's
up for a
cool.
long time. So it was cool to like connect with them and be like, hey, we have a chance to set up a local show. Do you want to get involved?
Hmm.
And then strip mall again, like once I moved here and tried to like connect with the Providence and Rhode Island, the broader Rhode Island music scene, it was tough because of the pandemic. But I just sort of like
Hmm.
started following local bands, local podcasts, local
Hmm.
news places, and that was how I got connected to them. And we're just looking for another band to kind of like flesh out the lineup and their sort
Yeah.
of like mathy emo stuff is obviously very very much
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
from the same world, so it felt like a good fit. But yeah,
Yeah. No, I absolutely, like I said, absolutely love Strip Mall. Love the Jack is one of my favorite drummers, and such a good band. So yeah, I can't recommend the Saturday night show enough. Please go and support all these bands, support Rhode Island music. And yeah, John, I really want to thank you again for taking some time and talking about uh, your incredible music that you're making. It's really cool to get a little bit more insight into everything that goes on. Just because, as I was saying, I've got to play a lot of music, but I haven't done anything like what you're doing. So it's really cool to learn from you, and what it takes to create the music that you're making. So yeah, thanks so much, John. I look forward to seeing you soon, and yeah, we'll connect and yeah, stay in touch, man.
great. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this and for not just doing this for me, but doing this for Rhode Island music. It's really cool. And again, as I was trying to like connect to music in Rhode Island, it was great to see people like you that are just sort of like taking their personal time to connect with local artists and share it out and promote stuff. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's like just what happened tonight. I've been lucky to learn a lot, but yeah, it does take a lot of time. As I've said in some
Yeah,
other interviews. But yeah, it's been good. I've been happy to be a part of the scene and just be able to give back, and again, just to be able to connect with people like you, and share your story is really important to me. So I'll definitely talk to you soon, John. And yeah, see you at the, plan to see you at the show. So thanks for taking the time to talk. Everyone, go support Align in Time. Go buy some records. Go to the show. And yeah, everyone have a good night.